Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you this morning as we continue with our journey in the Advent series. My name is Joey. If we haven't had the chance to meet, I serve as one of the pastors here, and it's so good to welcome you here this morning. Thank you for choosing to come here. Thank you for making this your family of faith. If it's your first time or you're coming back after a long time, we're glad to have you, and it's a privilege to walk together with you. So we've been going through this series for the last 4 weeks. Bucho mentioned that today is the fourth Sunday of Advent, and we've been talking about a season that is marked in the Christian calendar and that's been marked over generations by all the traditions of the Christian faith, called Advent, which means the coming or the arrival. And we've been asking ourselves, how do we prepare ourselves for the arrival of Christmas, for the arrival of Christ, so that we don't just arrive there busy, huffing and puffing in a hurry, so that we arrive there with intention, with purpose, so that our lives are marked by a presence and an awareness and a knowing of the things that bring us towards Christmas. And so we've been looking at the 4 traditional themes that are covered during Advent. We started off with hope, and then we looked at joy and peace. And this week, we conclude on this 4th Sunday of Advent with love. I'd like to start with a story. 3 weeks ago, a young boy of 4 years old left his home with his brothers to go and tend to his father's herd. And this was happening in a small village on the edge of Savo East National Park. And as they went out to tend to care for the cattle, they took them, just to try and find fodder for them. And as they were busy herding the cattle, a big freak storm happened that separated the young 4-year-old boy from, and they left the village. The pilot joined them, searching in the air. They looked for about 40 minutes, but they couldn't find the boy. The plane had run out of fuel, and so the pilot went back, filled up the tank, and they went out and searched again for another 3 hours without any success. The search party, hoping that they would find the boy on the same day, had only carried milk as their source of food for just to keep them going as they were trying to find the boy. And they looked and looked and looked all through the second day, and they got back, they went back to the village, still with a report that they had not found the missing boy. I want you to put a pin on that story there. We're going to come back to it. In Jeremiah chapter 31, from verse 31 to 34, it tells us, now the days are coming. It's a prophecy from the prophet Jeremiah. It says, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their minds and I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will already know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. The prophet Jeremiah begins to the people of Israel, promises about how he was going to interact and to live with them in relationship. It begins with the promise that God gives to Noah after the flood. And God tells Noah that I am not going to wipe away the human race anymore. I'm going to put my bow in the sky and to remind them that the image of God lives in them, and I'm not going to keep them away and separate from me forever. And then God gives them another promise and says to Abraham that out of you I am going to bless all the nations of the earth, in Genesis 12 and 15. And God makes a promise to him and says that out of you I'm going to bless your family, and I'm going to bless the families of the people of Israel, and I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth. And out of Abraham comes the family of the people of Israel. And God makes another promise to them. And he says to them, you people of Israel are going to be my people. God takes them out of Egypt where they were in captivity, and he brings them to the mountain called Sinai, or Sinai, depending on the school that you went to. And he gives them the 10 commandments as a promise to them, saying that you are my people. You are going to be separate from all the other nations of the earth. And out of my relationship with you, every nation on earth is going to see what God is like. But God's promise doesn't end with the nation of Israel. It continues. And God makes a promise to David, and he says, out of your life, out of your family, I'm going to bring one who will rescue and redeem, and who will reign over all the peoples, and he will be a descendant of David. And then in Jeremiah, God makes this new promise. And all of those promises throughout the Old Testament are captured in what are called covenants. And these were not like contracts, like legal documents, but rather they were commitments that God was making to the people of Israel out of a relationship, a loving relationship that he had with them. That God was saying to them, because I love you, I'm going to make an agreement with you. The conversation and the subject of love is, I think, one of the most discussed and debated and controversial topics in our modern world. However, despite all the investment that is put in making songs, writing books, telling stories, we somehow haven't been able to capture the essence of what love is. Despite all that all the philosophy that has been put into it, and all the energy that people have invested in it, our words and our action and our emotions seem to always fall short of capturing the beauty and the tenderness and the depth of love. And so because we can't find a word that allows us, or something that allows us to capture love in its fullness, what we do is we end up lumping up everything that we love in the same bucket. We say, I love chocolate, and I love this song. We say, I love my spouse, and I love this movie. We say, I really love this song. And at the same time, we say, this is the food that I love the most. And so we put all the things that we love into this one bucket, trying to capture the essence of what love is. But as God was making promises to the people of Israel, as he was walking with them through the scriptures and through the stories that we read in the Old Testament, we find that in this new covenant that we read about, these days that are coming, that Jeremiah tells of, we find that God reveals the true essence of love. In the 18th century, the Celtic teacher, Alexander Scott, used to tell a story of how royal garments in his day and age were made. When they were making royal garments, they would choose an expensive thread to weave into the garment that they were making. And this expensive thread that they were making, that they were putting in the royal garments, would be made of gold. And it was so expensive that you would not find it in any other clothing that was worn by the ordinary and the common citizens of his day. But because of how expensive it was and how it was woven into the garment, if you were to remove that thread from the garment, the entire garment would unravel. The entire garment would fall apart and you would have nothing to put on. And in the same way, the love that is revealed to us in the incarnation, the love that is revealed to us in the new promise that Jeremiah talks about, is the same. The divine love that reveals the true essence of who God is and who we are is revealed to us in the coming of Jesus. And I just want us to see 3 characteristics of this love and then to tie them back into our lives and to see how it reveals to us something that is completely unique, something that isn't dependent on human action, something that isn't dependent on our own performance, something that is not conceived of an idea of man, but something that originates in something deeper, truer, and something that is of greater essence. The first thing that we see about the love incarnate, God coming in the flesh, in the form of Jesus in the time of Christmas, is that love keeps its promise. Love always keeps its promise. In the covenants that I mentioned and in the promises that I mentioned before, we see that God had been telling the Israelites how he was going to walk with them and how he was going to deal with them. But then Jeremiah talks about this new promise that God makes to the people of Israel. And he says it's not going to be a promise like the one of old. In the days that are coming, this new promise is going to be written in the minds and in the hearts of the people, and it's not going to be dependent on an external action. When Jesus came into the world, what he did as the God-man, what he did as God in the flesh, was that he revealed to us that the promise of God comes to us in the form of his presence. That God always keeps his promise, but he doesn't just keep it from a distance, he keeps it by coming close to us and revealing himself as the one we can trust and the one that we can depend on. And so when Christ came, all the people, all the nations of Israel, the nation of Israel, and all the peoples who had been expecting someone to come and rescue and to save, experience it not in some action, but in the form of a person who takes the form of God in the flesh. And so God comes in Jesus and he shows us that the true nature of love, the true nature of the gift that God gives is not something that is distant. It's something that is very close and present to us. And so Jesus walks and lives as a human being, able to represent to us what God is and what our lives are in a relationship with him. The second thing we see in the love incarnate as Jesus comes to us is that love always gives life. In a different prophecy from the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 34 and verse 15. It says, this is God talking about how he will act. He says, I will tend my flock and I will let them lie down. This is the declaration of the Lord God, that I will seek the lost. I will bring back the strays and bandage the injured. I will strengthen the weak, but I will destroy the fat and the strong. I will shepherd them with justice. And if you are to connect the prophecy that Jeremiah made about the days that were coming, and you connected it, to this prophecy from Ezekiel, and you looked at the life of Jesus and what he did when he entered the scene of the world, you would notice and you would see that love always gives life. That when Jesus stepped onto the scene, his primary work, that the work that he did as he went on the business of his life, was exactly the things that we see described by Ezekiel here. That he went about tending to the lost, that he went about redeeming the people of Israel, telling stories of how God was bringing people back into a relationship of love. He went performing signs and miracles to show people that, you know what, this story of God was not just about a relationship based on emotion and feeling, but that the actions that God would do when he stepped onto the scene were actions that would bring healing and restoration and wholeness to the lives of people. Jesus went about his life with eyes of compassion and mercy, doing the work of restoring life to those who felt broken and to those who felt weak, to those who were hurt, and to those who were lost. And so as Jeremiah says, I'm going to put a new heart, he also says that when these days arrive, no longer will people teach each other and teach their neighbors and say to one another, know God. Instead, what is going to happen is that they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. That God was going to give the people a new start. He was going to give them a fresh beginning from which they could experience a life that was completely united with God. That God was going to take the pieces of their broken lives and he was going to put them together in such a way that their lives would have a fresh start that was no longer based on keeping laws, trying to make sure they live up to a particular standard, performing their way into the relationship that they were going to have with God. Instead, what was going to happen is that because God had drawn near to them, they were going to get the kind of life that allows them to begin again. And so Jesus tells parables about what the kingdom of God is like. And when he begins his ministry, he begins by saying, turn back to God because the kingdom of God is now near and your lives are now changed forever. And so Jesus reveals this love of God that gives life in a way that had not been revealed before, through the promises that had been given to the people and through the prophecies that had been told of by the prophets. And then lastly, love takes the first step. So love always keeps its promise. Love gives life. And then love takes the first step. In 1 John chapter 4, we read a letter from the Apostle John, who was the beloved disciple. And it says in verse 9 and 10, "This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us." This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. And the story of the arrival of Jesus that we read on Christmas, the story of the coming of God, is a revelation of how God always takes the first step to rescue us and to show us his love. Back to the story that I was telling in the beginning. After looking for 3 days and 4 days and 5 days, the people begin to lose hope of ever finding the 4-year-old boy. And the men, the search party of 70, now they are almost running out of food. They're having to mix the milk that they carried with water in an attempt to desperately find this boy. And then they get a message from 3 of the trackers who had been leading the team in an attempt to find the boy. And they said they found fresh footprints of this boy who had been missing. But these footprints are 15 kilometers away from the village where they live, and they are inside the national park. And so they go out one more time trying to find a needle in a haystack. Remember, there are predators out there. The boy has no food, he has no shelter, it's been raining, it's been pouring, it's been 5 days of him out in the wild. And they call on the pilot once more and they say, "We found fresh tracks. Would you help us once again to try and find this boy?" And so on the 6th day, the pilot goes out and they've told him, "You know what, when you get to the village, go north. We found the tracks about 15 kilometers. And so the pilot goes out searching for the search party so that he can, fly over them, trying to see from a much different angle to try and see if he could find the boy. As he's looking for the search party, he decides, you know what, let me just fly west for a little bit to see if there's any. And as he's flying west, he notices a small moving thing on the ground. And he's like, "What's that?" And as he circles around, he notices it's the boy. It's the boy they've been looking for. 6 days, he looks emaciated, but he's walking. And he can't believe that this boy has been walking and he's still alive. Now remember, the search party is far away and he has no way to contact them and no way to tell them that he's found the boy. And so for 3 hours, he circles over the boy, trying to make sure that he doesn't lose him. And the search party is nowhere to be found, but somehow, through some miraculous way, they are able to see the pilot and they begin to come, and he tries to signal them to tell them that he's found the boy. And they come and they pick up the boy, and the pilot, who can't believe what has just happened, flies back, goes to the village and tells the parents of the boy that he's been found. And as they wait for 2 hours and 3 hours for the boy to be brought back by the search party that had gone out, the villagers begin to just weep with joy about the story of their lost son, this lost boy who's been found. And the story of that lost boy is the story of all of us. That all of us, you and I, are the beloved of God. And the story of Christ is Him coming and looking and searching for us in an attempt to find us and to show us His love and to restore to us the identity of the beloved. I don't know the ways for you this year as you reflect back. I don't know which way you found yourself looking or waiting for love. I don't know if it's a promise that you were hoping would be kept and somehow through one way or another it fell through. I don't know if it's something that you had desired and anticipated, but somehow it didn't come through. I don't know if it's a step you were hoping to take, and because of one reason or another, you found yourself not being able to take that step. The story of Advent is a story of us being reminded that God did not wait for us. Instead, He came out searching for us. He came out searching for those of us who are lost, wandering through life, groping in the dark, feeling aimless and directionless. He came searching for those of us who are hurt, carrying pain from the wounds we'd experienced, looking for ways to find healing and restoration. It's the story of God coming to us who are thirsty and hungry, feeling empty and looking for satisfaction in all the things that promise love but are not able to fully deliver on that. It's the story of God searching for us with our doubts and our questions and saying to us, come with those questions. There is space enough in the love I have for you. In this Advent season, the story of Christmas is the story of you and I being reminded that we are the beloved of God and that He desires for us to be restored and redeemed to Him. Isaiah prophesied and said, "For the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed." And so Jesus comes to us as the fulfillment of that promise, that love keeps the promise of never being away from us. He comes to us as the fulfillment of a love that gives life and the promise of a love that takes the first step. But Jesus comes to us as more than just a promise to us and for us. Jesus comes to us in Christmas as a promise to give us the ability to carry that love into the spaces we find ourselves. And so, in Christmas, we see that Jesus says to each and every one of us that you and I get to be the carriers of that love and the catalysts of that promise of God to the people around us. We get to become the visible and tangible presence of God, of God's promises, of God's initiative, and of God's presence to the people around us. That as we go through our lives, in whatever ways we can, we are invited to move boldly, first to step into that belovedness of God, but then also to step out in that love deeply and dangerously and boldly to find people around us who are desperately asking and crying out for a love that is true to the essence. that this world has been created by God with that golden thread weaved into it. And the way for us to be able to live fully is to charge our lives with that radical love of God, and then to go out and to pour out that love in all the spaces that we find ourselves. And so in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 9 and 10, John says, this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world so that through him we might live through him. And this is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and he gave his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. And as we reflect on God's love for us this Christmas, as we reflect on the ways that we are the beloved, and the ways that we are invited to live out that belovedness, Jesus, who came to us in the flesh, left us with a reminder of that love. He left us with a reminder of that love in the form of the table, saying to each one of us, you and I, come to me, you who are hungry and thirsty, and I will satisfy. Come to me, you who feel lost and are wandering, and I will find a home for you. Come to me, you who are desiring to live out the love that you have experienced, and I will refresh you and renew you for that life.